Good morning and welcome back to the Livingston Parish News Morning Show. No collar issue today. I'm wearing a t-shirt. Thankfully for that. That was an interesting little start to yesterday's show. Appreciate you joining us this morning. My name is McHugh David, publisher and editor of the news. If you missed these shows, if you're watching us live, we appreciate that. If you missed these shows, you can always check them out. www.livingstonparishnews.com/podcast. They are free there. We have audio and video versions on that webpage, so please check that out. Also, we encourage you to check out our app. We're also once a week in print. You can check it out. So we're going to be doing pink covers this month in honor of breast cancer awareness, so please check that out. Our edition from yesterday, 10/10, is all about the election. We're going to be rolling through that during the show today. So if that's why you're joining us, we are going to roll through everything else really quick, especially a little short parish council meeting last night, and then get into this. We're also online, www.livingstonparishnews.com. It's $5 a month. You can check us out on social as well, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube. We post all of our content to those social media platforms, so we appreciate you checking that out. We also have long-form podcasts, which are on that webpage I mentioned earlier. We also push them out to podcast platforms, which include Spotify, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, that sort of thing. So please check that out at your earliest convenience. Your traffic today, school is out because it is Fair Week, and that means traffic's actually pretty favorable this morning on this Friday. Minor delays on I-12 westbound heading into Baton Rouge. Minor delays at River Road, 4-H Club Road, and 190 heading into Baton Rouge. No delays on 64 heading into Central. Some of you might remember that we started this show last summer and we got kind of used to these traffic patterns. And then school started and I was late for a while trying to figure out exactly when I needed to get here. So today is like a summer day. Traffic's pretty good right now here at 7:30 in the morning. So it should be, if you're heading out anytime soon, it should be a relatively easy commute to work if you're heading into Baton Rouge. Small delays on 447 at 10:25. That seems to have come back. I want to mention that. Weather today, it's currently 74 degrees. It's going to get warm this morning up until about lunch, up to about 87, 88 degrees. Then we're going to have some thunderstorms this afternoon, and the bottom's going to drop out. Your high tomorrow is 72. Your low overnight, 57. So please get ready. It's gumbo weather. So please get ready for that. It will get cold tonight. So, jumping into it, we're going to run through some of these other things real quick, then we're going to talk about the election. Mr. John Cowart was convicted yesterday of second-degree murder. His sentencing will be November 18th in front of Judge Burris at the 21st Judicial Court. It was 11-1 vote. The one vote was for manslaughter. His attorney, that would be Mr. Cowart's attorney, pushed for that because he was on alcohol and methamphetamines at the time of the murder, but the jury went with a second-degree murder conviction. The trial started Wednesday. What kind of came in as the hammer were two expert witnesses on DNA and cause of death from Baton Rouge, and they determined that the cause of death actually was the blunt force trauma from the hammer that he used. And if you want to read all about the grisly details, you can. Mr. Kevin Fambro fought through it's tough to cover these, especially these murder trials. He fought through the whole thing. The story is on www.livingstonparishnews.com/news. So she died of blunt force trauma. It was a hammer to the head after Cowart thought that she was dead. And then a forensic evidence expert came in and told the jury that the blood in the room was consistent with Miss Rogers. Miss Emily Rogers of Maurepas was the victim in this situation. And so Mr. Cowart has been convicted of second-degree murder, again, sentencing on November 18th. Parish Council was pretty light last night. Not much to talk about there. They did approve the Waffle House preliminary plat, so that was that. They were also visited by Miss Muriel Laws, who is running for Council District 6. She gave an interesting presentation. She does have a lot of formal federal government experience, almost 4 decades of it, handling lots of money, millions of dollars in projects. So she asked the council for their support and her constituents for their support, saying that her district was underrepresented. Excuse me. Gosh, having trouble this morning. Mr. Ronnie Morse, who is running for Bessie District 6, also came. He has a lot of experience helping with education, not necessarily in education. He is an engineer, but a lot of experience from the outside looking in on education. They also, Councilman Jeff Ard from District 1, as well as his brother, Sheriff Jason Ard, wanted to honor the chaplain who has served for 16 years as the detention center chaplain last night. So Mr. David Gray is going to be catching up with him to do a feature, but you can see photos of him on our Facebook page, just our Facebook page. If you're watching live, you can check those out. They're also on our website, but we will be following up with him for a feature. The council was relatively light considering the fact that there are 5 seats up for grabs. Incumbents Tableau Bell in District 8 and Jeff Averett in District 6 decided not to run again for those seats. So those will be, I guess you can just say again, up for grabs. Mr. Randy DeLatte and Mr. Barry Hardy will be competing for District 8. And then we already mentioned Miss Muriel Laws in District 6. That's also Derek Babcock, who was on the show Wednesday, on the afternoon show on Wednesday, I should say. Mr. Gerald McMorris and Mr. Steve McDaniel. So those 4 will be competing for District 6. Check those out. The other districts that are up for grabs are District 1, which is Mr. Jeff Ard. His opponent was kind of in it, and then it never really got off the ground, and it's looking like a one-man show there. District 2 is Gary Frog Talbert against Kyle Hoot Parker. Mr. Talbert is the incumbent. District 3, excuse me, is Maurice Scooter Keene, who is the incumbent, versus Shannon Sloan and Brian Ross. So that's a 3-person race there in District 3. So those are the seats that are up for grabs. It will be interesting to see how that turns out. We will talk a little bit more about the election here in just a second. One thing to mention, there is currently a campaign finance report out there and a complaint to the ethics board regarding Mr. Hoot Parker's financial submissions. 2 women apparently gave him $500 and $300 respectively to his campaign. However, they are tellers at the bank in which he has his campaign finance account. And he also listed another bank that was not his bank as where they worked, and they did not work there. So an interesting situation there. Of course, campaign finance, it has to go before the ethics board before it's even investigated. They've already met in October. Probably won't be a whole lot happening there before the election. But we are going to keep an eye on it, along with some of the others that have come through. Just waiting to see what the board will decide after they meet, or after they release their minutes of their meeting, and where it's going to go from there. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about the election in a minute. Uno's Dos Tacos, which is Mr. Tommy Stojak. He is also the owner of some Los Sombreros in Walker. He is pushing for an October 16th, that's next Wednesday, opening for his new Uno Dos Tacos location in Denham Springs on Rushing Road. He made that announcement at the Denham Springs Council meeting on Tuesday night after applying for an alcohol permit for beer and daiquiris, which they approved. So it will be interesting to see if he gets that place open by the 16th. Albany won their district opener last night against Bogalusa. Got a little revenge after last year's tough game. Hopefully that's reflective of what will happen with LSU on Saturday. But it was a good start. Good start to their district slate. Tonight, Springfield travels down to South Plaquemine. Walker is going to host sort of a homecoming from Mr. Coach Ricard and Scotlandville. I will be out there with your photos, and I believe Mr. Adam Henderson is going to be on the 1s and 2s. Denham is facing Central, looking for sort of a revitalization. They're trying to bounce back. Got to win a lot of these last games if you want a shot at the playoffs. And then, of course, the marquee matchup this week is undefeated Live Oak versus Zachary in Watson at the Eagles Nest. It's going to be bumping up there. I suggest if you're going, you go early. So please check that out. And again, Mr. Rob Diorman was with Albany last night. We have photo galleries, which are free, by the way. Our photo galleries are free. So we have a photo gallery of last night's football game, as well as Mr. Rob's write-up at www.livingstonparishnews.com/sports. Last thing before we get into the election, we did mention in our caption for this video, there'd be a special guest at the Livingston Parish Fair this evening. That is Miss Ashton Gill. She was a American Idol participant. Has done a lot of things with Lane Hardy, participated in a lot of concerts and that sort of thing. She will be singing tonight at the Livingston Parish Fair. It's Friday night at fair night, so all the kids going out today, supposedly, after getting off school and that kind of thing. So please check her out. Let me see here. What time does she go on? Let's see if we got a time for you. Mr. David went in. David Gray went in. Oh, wow. Okay. So she will sing during the fair's Older Folks Day on October 11th, which is 75 years and older. Program begins at 9 a.m. and she is supposed to start singing at 10. So if you want to go see her, you might want to go ahead and plan to head on out there. If you're older, you normally go to the Green Barn for Older Folks Day, which is Friday morning, starting at 9 a.m. You'll get to see her sing at 10. So there you go. Mr. David Gray will be out there seeing her sing. Probably get some video if you want to see it later. Okay, so let's talk about the election. Tomorrow, October 12th, is Election Day. There's a lot going on. I would highly suggest that if you don't have time, please, please go out and vote early. Polls open at 7 a.m. They close at 8 p.m. If you do not know where to vote, you can visit the Registrar of Voters office or give them a call. We also have a precinct list online, but sometimes that's not as applicable if you're new here, if you don't have your voter registration card handy, that kind of thing. So you might want to call the Registrar's office. Again, LSU football is playing tomorrow. Southeastern homecoming. It's the Saturday of Fair Day, and it's hunting season, and God only knows what else. So please try to get out and vote. If you're not in line by 8 p.m. to vote, and if you go to the LSU game, it's probably going to be impossible for you to be in line by 8 p.m. to vote. Go ahead and get it done early. Again, polls open at 7 a.m. It'll be a good time for you to get out there. We are going to have a full package of election information put together. It's going to be all the podcasts we've done, all of the show interviews we've done, all of the write-ups, and anything else we can think of. We're going to put it all together in one hub so that you can go check it out. We will have that live sometime around lunch today. We'll also have those precinct locations that I mentioned, and we're going to keep pushing that, trying to get as many people to look at it as possible. So please be on the lookout for that. I will be at the Clerk of Court's office tomorrow, not at the LSU game, to report results as they come in. And so we appreciate you checking us out on Facebook and Twitter to look for those results, especially if you're at the football game. Although I don't know, it might be exciting enough. You may not care until you walk out, and that's fine too. But my team and I, with Mr. Drew Walker, David Gray, and Kevin Fambro, are going to be trying to collect all this information as quickly as possible. Photos, quotes, that kind of thing. Get them out to you as soon as we can. If you're watching live, you will see our cover. This is the cover of Thursday's edition. As mentioned, it is pink in celebration or in recognition of Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And if you look on the inside, we have sample ballots, okay, and it runs through all of the elections. So the first page is just statewide, and it's just sample ballots. Then we have some renewals coming up. Two propositions for Fire Protection District 7, one of which is a millage renewal, expected to collect roughly $90,000 or over a 10-year period. Excuse me, it's a 10 mil tax, and then a $32 service charge. And then a 5 mil tax for Gravity Drainage District 1. So don't forget about those. Going into some of the more contentious races. Right now you've got 3 of them. One is the assessor. You've got Brandon Browning coming out of the Watson area, and then you have Jeff Taylor, the incumbent, who has been in the office since 1999. There was a lot that came out on TV early on about that race, kind of died off. One of the things that did come out about Delia Taylor and her business, no enrichment there. However, there some questions about, well, is the ethics board going to let her off for being a sole proprietor? She did go through, having talked to the Secretary of State. They do not handle sole proprietorships. Department of Revenue does. She has a Department of Revenue number. It will be interesting to see how the ethics board handles that. She is also now registered with an occupational license in Livingston with the sheriff's office. It was also discovered that nothing illegal had gone down between her and the school board because of that issue. That there was no problem there. So it will be interesting to see how that contention shows up in the polls. Kind of waiting to see on that one. Now, the interesting thing about the three races that are contentious is only two of them have the chance for a runoff. That isn't one of them. That's a 1 versus 1 race. So again, by tomorrow, probably not right at 8, but tomorrow by about 10, when all precincts have reported, we'll have a winner on that one. The other two are very interesting. District 13, which is the Senate district, nearly $1 million spent on that race. And if it does hit a runoff, which it has the potential to do, it will probably break $1 million spent on a Senate district. Some interesting stuff there. Miss Edith Carlin's camp and the PACs that have surrounded her sent out a couple of mailers, a few of which that were just not correct. One was that Mr. Pope was high and dry during the flood of 2016. That's not true. He flooded, his son flooded, his mother flooded, his whole family flooded. He also personally flooded in 83 and 77. The second one was talking about a House bill with regard to Medicaid expansion. That mailer cited the wrong House bill, cited a bill that was intended for contested or hot, what they call hot precincts, wherein they would be able to have a law enforcement officer there to keep the peace. The bill that they were trying to refer to was Medicaid expansion, which Mr. Pope did vote for to push to the House floor out of committee, where he then voted against it, and of course the measure failed. Medicaid expansion did not come until several years later during the John Bell Edwards situation. Now, that is an interesting race because there is a third prong there, Miss Devin Cavalier. If she pulls enough votes, you could have a runoff between Miss Edith Carlin and Mr. J. Rogers Pope. Of course, that vote will be on November 16th, 5 weeks after the original election. Will be interesting to see what we get out of that one. The third one is the 21st Judicial District Judge. Mr. Doug Hughes retired, or the Honorable Doug Hughes retired on June 30th, opening the door for this special election. Right now, you have Mr. Brian Abels, Mr. William Scott Dykes, and Mr. Ernie Drake are competing for those. Some interesting situation with regard to campaign finance. Technically, in a judge's race, the judge is not supposed to solicit funds. He's not really supposed to participate in fundraising. He is supposed to have a committee that does that for him. Well, Mr. Ernie Drake is the head of his committee, as listed on his campaign finance report. Again, that's another campaign finance issue where who knows if it will get solved or not. We have been told that there was a campaign finance complaint, an ethics complaint filed on that behalf. Who knows if that will get answered before the election. But again, we do have an interesting race there and the potential for a runoff. And it's been kind of contentious, a little contentious, not as bad as the assessor in District 13. But as mentioned, there's some interesting contention there. Another contentious race has been District 8. That's Mr. Randy DeLatte and Mr. Barry Hardy. Of course, Mr. Barry Hardy is the father of Lane Hardy. District 8 is the Springfield-Maurepas area in the southeast corner of the parish. And Mr. Randy DeLatte is the husband of Miss Dee Dee DeLatte, who is the parish permit director. It will be interesting to see how that turns out in that race. There's been a lot of back and forth going on there. District 6, meanwhile, has 4, as we mentioned, contestants, but it really has not been contentious. Not a whole lot of back and forth between the 4 of them. A lot of hustle. It's always good to see. District 1, of course, we mentioned was kind of dead on arrival. Nothing ever really went there. But, as Jeff Ard said when he came on our show again as a campaign candidate, he did say that it was nice for him to be able to get out and talk to some of his constituents, have conversations with them, reconnect with some of those people he might have lost, that sort of thing. So it was good to see him out there hustling. Now, District 2, that's interesting. Another point of contention there, but it is 1v1, and it really hadn't been as bad as the others. But a lot of it is centrally focused around Premier Concrete. Will be interesting to see how that turns out. That is, of course, incumbent Gary Frog Talbert, who, as a lot of people know, was involved in a Premier Concrete issue starting almost a year ago is when Premier Concrete started. Mr. Talbert got involved in around February, and then it has dragged forward from there. They will be going before planning. That would be Premier Concrete will be going before planning in October. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out for them. Excuse me. District 3, which is North Denham, a little bit. There was a lot of contention before those folks qualified to run, especially between Ms. Shannon Sloan and Mr. Scooter Keene. Mr. Keene and Mr. Gary Frog Talbert were both together on mosquito abatement. Ms. Shannon Sloan was heavily opposed to it, and so that kind of launched her campaign. That kind of talk has since died down. Will be interesting to see. It could be a runoff there as well. We'll be interested to see because there are 3 people with Mr. Brian Ross, having a late push here, seeing a lot more of him. So it will be interesting to see how that race turns out. Bessie is another one. If you're not sure what Bessie is, it is sort of wherein John White, State Superintendent John White, is the manager of the state school system. They are the legislative body, talking about things like, teacher benefits, teacher pay, which also, now teacher pay still has to go through the legislature because it still has to be paid for. But Common Core, those sorts of things. Mr. John White has had a very contentious relationship, and I know I use that word a lot because there's just a lot of contention this year in the election cycle. Some of it a little dirty, not real impressed with it. But in this case, there's been a lot of back and forth, a lot of testiness between the Bessie board and State Superintendent John White. So how that board works with him going forward, especially since Mr. John White is very pro-Common Core, and the board historically has been anti-Common Core, especially with a lot of these candidates running for Bessie this year are mostly anti-Common Core. So that will be interesting to see as well. A lot of interesting stuff going on coming up here. Another thing is if you are looking for the proposed constitutional amendments, we have all 4 of them on page 3 of this edition. We also have a written story about them if you're interested in what's going on there, what the background is, what they're after. We also did a full podcast, which we will be sharing as part of that election primer, where you can go, it's me talking about the whole thing. Probably best if you go read it, unless you're really interested in hearing me talk about it. I'm just talking about what I wrote up in the story, but there are 4 constitutional amendments. One of which, so number 1 is talking about exempting property that is destined for the Outer Continental Shelf, which is where the oil rigs are. Equipment that came back and needed to be repaired, or equipment that was purchased and about to be sent. There were tax assessors on the coast who realized that they could get a little more money out of those folks, since sometimes they do sit there for 2 or 3 weeks in a warehouse before they're shipped out, or shipped out to the rig, or if they come back in for repair, they could be there for a couple of months. And so tax assessors were trying to get their piece of the pie out of that. Well, I can't even say unfortunately. No opinion here. Just, it's anything that's destined outside of the country in the same manner is not taxable. So the fact that it's going out to the rigs, they're trying to remove that from the ability to be taxed. The next one, there's a lot going into it, talking about removing funds or taking funds from the Education Excellence Fund, which is the big tobacco settlement for the 90s. We're still getting paid on that. And that money coming out and going to specific things like lab schools and specialty schools in Baton Rouge and other places around the state. The reason it'll be hard to vote against this is because they're already sending money to charter schools, already sending money to public schools. So it will be interesting to see how folks vote. But this money is already going to most schools. Now the lab schools want a little piece of the pie. So when you're talking about an unconstitutional tax, you're talking about a tax that you contest is unconstitutional or unlawful. There is an amendment here, and a constitutional amendment to give the Board of Tax Appeals full jurisdiction over any kind of appeal that comes through. So they would be judge, jury, and execution on that one. As it stands right now, you would appear before the board, you would give your testimony, and then they would probably send you to the court where a judge would have to decide it. Now they're saying that you can just, once you go before the Board of Tax Appeals, as long as there's no legal ramifications to any of this, like it's you versus someone else that needs to be decided in court, they'll give you a ruling. Not entirely sure how that would work out. A lot of it depends on who's on the board. However, the process is very cumbersome as it is, because it involves the legal system. It is trapping a lot of traffic inside the court system. Will be interesting to see how people vote on that one. There are a lot of pros and cons there. The last one, which has to be, it's a statewide vote, and is to exempt certain properties as determined by government in Orleans Parish from property taxes. They're having trouble selling homes or getting people to occupy homes because their property taxes are so high. So it will be interesting to see, lots of interest here, will be interesting to see how the state votes on that, because once they vote on it, then they'll have to vote on it in Orleans Parish, but it is a change to the Constitution, so it has to be a statewide vote. Again, we're going to have all sorts of coverage coming up. There are some smaller races. There is a Livingston Alderman race that we will, town of Livingston Alderman race that we will be covering. And let me flip through here real quick. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. There's a lot going on. Oh gosh, how could I forget? District 71 is a House seat. This one is almost bound to have a runoff. There's 5 contestants: Mr. Buddy Mincy Jr., Mr. Laurie Calais, Jonathan Davis, Ivy Graham, and Robert Poole. And I apologize, I can't believe I almost forgot this one. Big chance for a runoff here. Early polls showed Buddy Mincy in the lead. Miss Laurie Calais is the lone Democrat. Vote for the teacher, she says, and it will be interesting to see what kind of vote she can pull to force a runoff. Lots of late surge from Ivy Graham and Robert Poole as well. So it'll be interesting. Again, they might pull some of that vote. Mr. Jonathan Davis was strong in the center, did very well at the council forum, but not a lot late. So it will be, how much vote is pulled in those 5 directions is going to be something to keep an eye on tomorrow night, and whether or not it'll hit a runoff. Probably out of all the elections, maybe with District 6 in a close second, but that is the highest chance for a runoff, is for House Seat 71. So we will see about that one. Again, we will have full coverage on our website, a whole wrap-up of all the election coverage we've done, so you can check it out before you go vote at the polls tomorrow. We're going to get that out around lunch today, so that you will have that for your use before tomorrow, if you care to do such a thing. I have talked enough today. Again, my name is McHugh David, publisher and editor of the news. Traffic has remained light. It should be an easy commute for you if you're going into Baton Rouge today. Please remember that there will be thunderstorms this afternoon, and they are bringing cold weather. Will be cold overnight in the 50s, high of 72 tomorrow. It's going to get warm again before we get some morning showers on Wednesday, which is going to drop the temperature one more time. So we're going to be getting bands of cold fronts coming through.